In this video, we're going to take a look at the DOM, the Document Object Model. One of the most important things to how to use JavaScript. Now, the first thing that happens, of course, is the browser loads your web page, and it takes the HTML, parses it, and then renders it to your web page. And we can see HTML right over here. The second thing the browser does is it creates the DOM, the Document Object Model, and it creates all of these objects for our HTML tags. Every one of these HTML tags has a corresponding object. So the HTML tag, that has an object over here. The div tag, that has an object over here. The paragraph tag, that has an object over here. So again, it's a two-step process. Remember, the HTML page gets loaded first, and then the browser creates the document object model based off the HTML code that was rendered. And so it is the DOM that allows us to use our JavaScript code to access parts of the web page. So that's how it works. Now, here's the first important point. Both of these are documents. This is an HTML document, and this is the DOM. The DOM is a document too. It's just a different representation of this code, but they're the same thing. They're both documents. In fact, the web page that gets loaded, the web page that the user sees, is a document. So they are all actually the same thing. They're just different representations. And so one is HTML, markup code, of course. One is the document object model, that's a document. And the actual web page that gets loaded, once again, is a document. And once again, they are just different representations, but they are the same thing. That's the key point here. And so that's what the D stands for, the document. That's the first part of the document object model. Now the object is just what I just said. Every one of these tags has a corresponding object. So the head tag has an object, and that gets created for us. The body has an object, that gets created for us that we can use. And we know what objects are now, right? They comprise methods and properties that we can use. And we can use those methods and properties to alter every single element in our web page. Now you might ask, well, why do we have to use objects? Why can't we just directly put our JavaScript in here? Why do we have to go through this DOM? Why do we need to use the DOM to change and alter our web page? Why can't we just put our JavaScript directly in here? And the reason for this is that HTML is a markup language. It is not code in the way JavaScript is. JavaScript uses objects. It doesn't use a markup language. That's why we need objects created for each one of these tags over here. Then our JavaScript can access these elements and use them. So that's the main reason we need the document object model. That's really the whole reason, is that they are two different languages. But this document object model acts as an interface that allows us to get to the web page and access each different part of that web page, and then go ahead and do whatever it is we want to do to that particular section. And so that's really the essence of this object part of the document object model. Now, there's also this final word here, model, the M, and that just represents this tree structure that we have. That's what the model stands for. And what is this tree structure doing? It's the relationship between all of these elements. And if you know HTML, and you probably already do if you're watching this series, you know that each HTML element is a parent or child element. So for instance, the HTML element is the parent of the head and body element, and the body element is the parent element of this H1 and these two div elements, and so on and so on. And of course, this H1 element is a child element of the body element. So that's also what this model has to do with. It's the relationship between these elements. And together they all equal the document object model. Now let's go back to objects for just a minute here. Now at the top of the food chain is the document object. This object actually represents the entire web page, the entire web document. So we're going to be using this in the next video, actually, when we actually start using the document object. And so this is one of the critical objects. And so we can use all the methods and properties that are associated with the document object that gets created for us. And so again, we will be using that in the next video. Now, we've been talking about HTML tags and how an object is created for each one of those tags. But what about some of the other areas in an HTML page? Specifically, the attribute. How do we get to that? And the actual text. How do we get to that? How do we reference that? And that's where this concept of nodes comes into place. And that's what the document object model has. It has this concept of nodes. And there are actually 12 types of nodes, but the good news is we only need to know about 3 of those. The first is the element node, and we've been talking about those. And actually nodes are a type of object. It's just a little bit more specific. And so again, the first type of node is the element, and we've been talking about that. The second is the attribute, and that's this ID attribute that we have right here. There are also class attributes. Remember, you can use a class or ID. If you followed my CSS series, those are the 2 types of things you can put in here. So there's an attribute, and that's the second type. And then the third type is actually the text. That's a node. That's called the text node. And actually they correspond in that order: 1, 2, and 3. And that's how we actually reference them in our JavaScript code. So again, that sort of relates to hierarchy. So if we take a look at this div section 1, the element node is the div tag, and everything's contained in there, right? We have the opening tag and the closing tag. That represents the element node. And then we have the attribute right here. That's inside this div tag. That's the attribute node. And then below that, we have another actual element node, which is the paragraph node. And within that, this first fish text is the text node. So those are the 3 main types of nodes. But as you can see, we can have different types of nodes within the div node. And the paragraph is an element node. The div is an element node. The ID selector is an attribute node. And again, the text has its own node, which is called the text node. And we will talk a lot more about nodes in future videos. So that's going to do it for this video. I will see you guys in the next video, where we will start to use some of the methods and properties of one of the most important objects in the DOM, the document object. See you guys then.